What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and some time has passed about Journey Through the Radiant Citadel, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it because some more information has surfaced, and probably not in locations and in places that you would think that it would have. And when I say Twitter, you're like, well, obviously information surfaces on Twitter, but maybe not from the source you would have originally thought. And I think there's definitely some of the concerns that people have. I made a short talking about how it basically, Radiant Citadel's not replacing Sigil and Planescape and any of that kind of stuff, and that couldn't be more true. But there's more information there, and I wanted to talk about it, and specifically a little bit about the sort of lead director, kind of co-lead of the book, Ajit George, who you might have seen in some of the interviews on the D&D website. And if you're like me, his name came out of nowhere, and I was just like, oh, maybe he works at Wizards of the Coast, and it's just somebody we haven't seen on a book until now. And what's interesting is, no, he doesn't actually work for Wizards of the Coast at all. He is, I think, possibly the first time that there's been a co-lead on a book that isn't someone who works for Wizards of the Coast. He's essentially a freelance agent, but was given seemingly almost 100% creative control of this book. And another thing that I wanted to say is a lot of people, myself included, associated it with the most recent kind of analog to that, which would be Candlekeep Mysteries. And myself, and again, many other people, including some of the authors from Candlekeep Mysteries, stated that obviously there seemed like a quick turnaround time, and there wasn't a lot of effort seemingly put into what happened there, and it seemed like things were rushed. And I found out over the course of this research that Journey Through the Radiant Citadel has been in development for 2 years, which I think, based on some of the stuff we've seen, maybe one of the longest lead times we've seen on a D&D book, possibly at least in recent years. So one last thing, hey, if you like what I do here, consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a lot of backlog coming out, a lot of awesome Kickstarter things that are coming out. I got a ton of unboxings, and I want to get back to finishing up all of the content for the books and stuff that have come out before new stuff starts releasing, including some things about some other RPG systems and RPGs that are out there. And then again, I'll be at PAX East next week, so if you're there, come find me and say hi. So let's jump over to Twitter real quick, and we'll jump to Ajit's Twitter. This came out in June of 2020, so this is, right in the midst of the, the pandemic, and it's a little bit about him and who he is. So he went on to say, his full-time job, he's the director of operations of the Shanti Bhavan Children's Project, which is this massive, not-for-profit organization to help bring kids up out of poverty in India. And he actually spends the majority of his year in India. In fact, he was actually featured in a Netflix documentary called Daughters of Destiny. And basically, the Netflix team looks like they followed him for 7 years to capture kind of what his company and what they do. So anyway, shaped his philosophy on life. Here's a TED Talk that he did talking about this stuff. There's a ton of information here, and you can see, I'm going to keep going through because this, while very interesting stuff, and I'll link all of these things in the description, while I would recommend you read them because it definitely helps give you a little bit of the mindset of who Ajit is at the man, but that's not really relevant to our D&D discussion per se. But if we jump down here, he says, I've been a lifelong gamer. I first played D&D in 5th grade, maybe earlier, but really fell into gaming in high school. It was my salvation during a very dark and challenging period of my life. Truthfully, gaming has been important during many challenges. Says he's written for a handful of games, which helps give you an idea of the background, right? The Warren, Dialect, Misspent Youth, and a couple things from Monty Cook Games. I don't write often for games because writing is deeply personal. It has to resonate with me for me to do it. And then here in June of 2020, he says, I just recently finished something that is the most important thing I've ever written for a game. Writing it was a powerful and intense experience, and I was teary-eyed many times while working on it. It's under NDA, but I hope when people read it, they will love it. And then he goes on to talk about advocacy in gaming and things that he's done in the past and at Gen Con. Being a gaming advocate, his speech he gave, and if we continue on, you can see, again, talking about his partner and his wife, who helped him through a lot of different things and has been there with him, supporting him the whole time. But then he updated it here on April 1st and says, time to update this a little. Since this thread, I've written for both D&D's Ravenloft and was the creator, co-lead, and writer for Radiant Citadel. Both projects have been profoundly important and personal to me, and I'm honored to have been a part of them. So then we have another tweet from March 30th, just a couple weeks ago from this year, again, continuing to talk about this book. I'd like to share some thoughts I had on storytelling and journeys from the Radiant Citadel and how it might differ a little from other books. This thread should also shed some light into the insights and the process of how we made the book. On one side, we have great adventure paths that take you through an entire storyline and a final culmination with a big bad. And that's one of his favorite things, referencing Curse of Strahd. They're usually a tight through line like a movie or a novel. On the flip side, we have adventure anthologies like Tales from the Yawning Portal, and he says those are more kind of like the Twilight Zone, right? Standalone pieces in a larger series, which is actually a really good analogy, right? If you've ever watched The Twilight Zone, it is a show, but there really is no through line between them. It's just a variety of different things. It says, Journey through the Radiant Citadel occupies an interesting middle ground that I think of somewhere closer to a life path. I know this term is used in gaming in different ways. While adventure paths are great, they don't resemble how we usually go through life. There is never much consistency, at least not for me, that would fit in an adventure path. Where I live, the people in my life, what I want, what I cherish, all have changed from age 5, 15 to 25, and so on. We may have some key touchstones, a home, a place, a family, lifelong friends, but most of what the rest changes through our lives and grow into ourselves. That's, I think that's part of the story of the Radiant Citadel. It had a long pipeline for the writers, which I think is also a testament to why I do think and have kind of shifted my stance on how I do think this will be, at least in my opinion, based on what I'm reading here. And again, take this with a grain of salt. This is just my opinion, and we're also getting the opinion of the co-lead of it, right? So there's obviously going to be bias there. But to me, it seems like this might be the crowning jewel, the best of the anthology series, if you will, just based on the passion and the time frame given to the writers, right? We onboarded the writers in September of 2020 and had last drafts came in July of 2021. I wanted this time for several reasons, but in part I was to ensure we were building something larger than our individual pieces. There were 2 rounds of pitches. F. Snyder, and I think the Strix is his wife, reviewed each of them with many things in mind, including levels, themes, etc., but even things like geography and terrain. We wanted each adventure to build off of each other, hitting different key notes and key points. Additionally, at every stage, the writers got to see each other's work on a shared platform. They saw each other's pitches, location, adventures, monsters, Pinterest boards for art that inspired them, etc. There were co-working video sessions and plenty of conversations. We also had a dedicated peer review period when the writers were not only reading each other's work, but commenting and advising on each other. All of this provided an opportunity to pull elements from one another and riff off of each other. Some of this subtle, very subtle in the final, some of this is subtle, very subtle in the final product. But some of this is very obvious, overt, including the Radiant Citadel itself. And I believe what you end is a book that gives players a real-life path that takes from level 1 and ends at level 15. Sorry, Adora's sleeping in my lap if you heard. She's snoring. But that is, I think, is a key thing too, because I don't get the feeling that with Candlekeep Mysteries, Tales from the Yawning Portal, I don't get the feeling that these adventures, at least in the past, there was no through line. They all felt very much like they were written in a silo or a vacuum. And the writers, at least I could be completely off on this, but that's my interpretation, is that if I wrote, Adventure 1 in Candlekeep Mysteries, I would have no concept what the person who's writing in Adventure 10 was. Now, I might have gotten some, heads up document lore information from someone like Chris Perkins that says, hey, here's a little bit about Candlekeep, do what you will. But I don't get the feeling that they had these sort of, hey, let's see what everybody's working on, let's have a peer review period. To me, it seemed very much like, here's what I designed in the parameters that you gave me, and it was reviewed by the final Wizards team. Now, maybe there was peer reviewing that happened just, because people wanted to do that, but not almost like a formal peer review like it seems like is here. There is no story-ending big bad to fight. The last one in the book is epic. This also gives us a little bit of story or insight into what the adventures are going to be like as well, right? There's no one story being told. You will change over time radically in different ways and embark on new paths. I think this mimics our own lives. Yet you will have touchstones. The Radiant Citadel is very deeply and organically tied to each place and adventure and vice versa. You'll have your family, which is your party, your home, which is the Radiant Citadel, and more, and the themes of this book will resonate throughout. As an aside, the more defers to Dawn Incarnates, who would be wise elders or mentors to your family, as well as other factions, NPCs, etc. They can play different roles in the life of your character. I'll talk about them more down the road. I hope this helps give people an understanding of how one could approach journeys through the Radiant Citadel. Yes, absolutely, it's modular, and each piece can be taken individually and separately for your homebrew world or established D&D world campaigns. But you can also play it straight from the beginning to end, and you'll get a very fulfilling arc for your characters as their lives take twists, turns, discover new places, and learn new things about themselves. Whichever way you play the book, I hope you find it deeply fulfilling. And I also want to say that I appreciate that, because I also feel like, again, they started saying it now, but for the most part, I feel like Wizards of the Coast doesn't want to encourage you to do this, like use these necessarily in a homebrew campaign. They kind of want you to play their adventures as they are. Maybe I'm off on that, but like this is, again, I think part of the freedom of being sort of a freelance person is you can say like, yeah, you could play this as it is, or drop it into your own game, whatever you want. But as you can also see, I don't even know how many tweets we just read through, but this is clearly someone who's extremely passionate about this project and is willing to be as open as one can be on Twitter in a public forum to tell you what he can about the product that he worked on. And there's a couple other tweets here. Because Alpha Stream did something here and said, if you're confused reading Sigil versus the Radiant Citadel, Sigil is a central hub city introduced in Planescape. It sits between all the outer planes but has doors to any plane. It's cosmopolitan place with factions, intrigue. If we go and read this, Sigil, Radiant Citadel is found in the ethereal plane. It connects to specific planes based on the history of the Citadel, and the DM can add additional planes because some are basically open slots. Both locations act as a hub, perfect for adventuring. This greatly helps the DM. New things can be scary for established players. There was a time when Usenet was full of posts about the abomination that was Sigil. Now it's a beloved place. We can be happier fans by shortening that time frame to find out something that is new and awesome. So that was basically the original thread, and then Ajit comes in and comments on that and says, to be more specific, the Radiant Citadel only connects to limited places in the material plane. It's also different in flavor, feel, cultural, politics, factions, architecture, etc. than Citadel. We will get something unique with the Citadel, but this thread nailed it. Also, the Radiant Citadel doesn't have doorways that can pop up anywhere. The Concord jewels, which you can kind of see in the sort of like ruby red, crystal, and garnet style gems that seem to be a function of the Citadel itself. We've seen that in some of the art. Which orbit the Citadel as giant glowing gemstones are the transits. They have specific functions, limitations, and potential risks involved with them. It's quite different than Sigil. It'd be hard to do an exhaustive list on how different the Radiant Citadel is from Sigil, in the same way that trying to compile a list of differences between Waterdeep of the Forgotten Realms and Tear of Dark Sun would take a long time. Oh, it's also a very different history, and that history is important, okay? And then lastly, we have, he said, oh cool, my interview with Dragon Plus came out. I think folks will enjoy it to learn a little bit more about the Radiant Citadel, which we will look at briefly here. Gives more info on places within, as well as Incarnates, Concord Jewels, and the Shield Bearers of the Citadel. And the waking dream about the Concord Jewel for Serena Marie's Din Sing night market was so vivid. At a certain point, I was having these waking dreams about the book a lot. I kept falling into this liminal space about the book and the Citadel itself. Anyway, the interview is a meatier one, so a lot of good information is shared in it for folks to sink their teeth into. I hope it continues to help people understand the Radiant Citadel. Much of its questions on why does this work the way it does? While the Citadel is surreal and strange, it's an internal logic. It made no sense. If it made no sense at all to me, I cut it. I didn't want weird for weird's sake. It's a good insight on the design. And maybe circling back to the Sigil comparison, if Sigil is asking questions about the nature of reality, then the Radiant Citadel is asking questions about society and community, about fundamental questions about people and humanity. Finally, while I feel the Citadel is hashtag solarpunk, the book is more hashtag hopepunk. It has enormous complexity, moments of hardship and challenge. The directive to the writers was neither utopian nor dystopian lands, yet I believe the book has an underlying note of hope. I don't think hashtag hopepunk is the absence of darkness, of the hardships we face as people. Rather, it is the overcoming of those things, the triumph of humanity in the face of long odds and the collaboration of people to do so. And I think that's what this book is saying. So let's head over to Dragon Plus. We do have this latest issue here, which if you guys are interested in me covering the other aspects of this issue of Dragon Plus, let me know in the comments and I'll do that. But I wanted to just, again, primarily focus on Journey Through the Radiant Citadel, which we can skip to here. Okay, so co-lead Ajit A. George shares a message of hope as diverse cultures shape the newest destination in the 5th edition D&D. So they mentioned Candlekeep Mysteries delivered an anthology of 17 short standalone adventures. Again, my thoughts are well known on that. The new anthology of D&D adventures, Journey Through the Radiant Citadel, promises to do much of the same, as every one of its 13 adventures is tied to the Radiant Citadel itself, a gem-like structure that binds together numerous locations across the material plane. We'll scroll through, we'll see some art as we go here as well. The idea came from Ajit A. George following his creation of the domain, a domain of dread for Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. It was important for me to be able to write something that was Indian-related for Van Richten's Guide, and I became the first person of Indian origin in D&D history to write an Indian-inspired element. That was a powerful moment, and I wanted to do more. So he developed his pitch with Jeremy Crawford, Wes Snyder, and others on the D&D team. I went into that pitch not sure they'd go for it. So basically, he got to write on Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and that basically, this guy is clearly a mover and a shaker and can manifest things to happen. At least that's what it seems to me. Not only is obviously, we talked about all the awesome charity work and things that he does, but he got to write on a book, in like a section of a book, and then basically says, you know what, I have this idea for a whole new thing, a new anthology, a new location, all this. Let me pitch it to Wizards, and they bought it. So whether that be because, I mean, it sounds to me like, one, there's a passion there, and also the guy just seems to know how to write things well enough, and to the point where obviously we're getting a book based on this. And I also liked, again, some of the stuff we saw in that tweet thread, the insights to say, you know, if it didn't make sense, I cut it. I didn't want to put in weird stuff just to put in weird stuff. Excuse me. So Wes and I closely worked together on most of the book, though we also took lead in specific areas where we had expertise. The team set to work bringing on contributors, including Justice Armin, who used to work for Beetle and Grib, now is a senior game designer at Wizards of the Coast. And then, you know, obviously a handful of other folks. Some of these names you may recognize, you know, Bashir Gauss. I recognize TK Johnson is a name that I recognize, Serena Marie. And again, it looks like this might be, I guess, I don't know if this is all of the individual writers of each individual adventure, or perhaps contributors, editors, and so on, maybe artists as well. The team wanted as many creators of color working on the project as possible, including on the interior and cover art. This led to contributions by a diverse group of illustrators, including artists, Even Fong, who created the book's traditional cover, and artist Sija Hong, who also created the alt cover. The project developed over time and came to feature adventures in exciting new locations, along with adventures in a gazetteer, along with each adventure, rather, as a gazetteer detailing a new location, like a night market, a city, or a region, along with tons of exciting story hooks. The gazetteer also provides suggestions for players creating characters connected to locations where each adventure is set. Let's see. The creation of varied adventures and locales also help with the construction of an exciting new location, the Radiant Citadel itself. Sitting in the depths of the ethereal plane is a collaborative society built using the knowledge of many lands. Of the 27 cultures who established, 15 remain, so we got a lot of history here. 13 of those are the basis for the adventures, so there's 2 other ones if you want to try to take those and expand on them for yourself. With 2 fleshed out in gazetteers in the epilogue. Ajit, the lead writer on the Radiant Citadel section, worked to incorporate as much influence from the rest of the book's adventures and locations as possible, demonstrating how it took many hands to build such a unique place. It's not a typical fantasy city, he says. Once all the adventure gazetteer sections were finished, this I also like too. Once all the adventure gazetteer sections were finished, I steeped in them for months. It's reflective of the Radiant Citadel itself, and I created it after reading about those 15 lands. So again, continuing with this concept of a very collaborative-based process, it sounds like the concept of the Radiant Citadel existed. And then the 13 writers went off and made their own little areas, and then wrote their adventures. And then Ajit took and just read and pored over all these, seemingly for months, and then took all of those to make sure when he finished writing the Radiant Citadel, that it was infused with the culture and aspects of those different adventures so that it all seemed as a through line thread to make it all work together. While the Radiant Citadel acts as a hub for those civilizations, it has the ability to generate hundreds of storylines and adventures. This is a book you could spend years role-playing with. There's so much replay value in going into these gazetteers and building out further plots. I particularly like the geopolitical complexity of the Shield Bearers. They're the Radiant Citadel's dedicated search and rescue force deployed to lands in times of crisis. Strict rules of engagement prevent them from taking sides in a conflict. Their job is to extract the vulnerable and defenseless and only defend themselves if attacked. This is the organization to join if you genuinely want to be a hero. You're going to go into tough situations and rescue people who have no hope. It's a job with a high casualty rate, but by the rules of engagement, you are not allowed to attack unless you're attacked first. During peer review, one of the comments was, conflict gets really messy. What happens if you restrict players like this? I feel when players find themselves in complex situations like this, that's where the fun stuff happens. If they break the rules of engagement, they might rescue the innocents, but there may be a larger geopolitical implications that kickstart new plots and adventures. And it's interesting because it is a limitation, right? You can't engage unless you're engaged first. But it is true, right? That could not obviously be the focus of your story or the campaign that you're playing. And now all of a sudden something whole new has spiraled out of this one little aspect. Also, again, knowing what we know about Ajit and sort of his history of helping people out in the real world, this doesn't surprise me that this is kind of a concept of these shield bearers, right? People who are heroes that are helping getting people out of tough situations. Kind of seems like it's right. Someone writing from personal experience. As you'll see from Sean Wood's incredible art, the Radiant Citadel is a landmass clustered around a gargantuan gemstone known as the Auroral Diamond. Like, that's the big crystal in the center. While its major landmarks like the Court of Whispers, the Trade Discal, the Palace of Exile, the Passage of Respite, and the House of Convalescence are easily accessible, the journey is connected to the journey to its connected kingdoms borrow the gem motif. The Concord jewels, which ferry people to and from the connected realms, came out of a vision I had. Originally, the Radiant Citadel was surrounded by 5 mini-cities that would act as transports, but I thought that was messy. How does this mini-city land? I was in bed one night puzzling over the Radiant Citadel when I had a vision for Dinsing Night Market from the Salted Legacy adventure. In that waking dream, I saw a giant ruby glowing in the night sky floating down slowly to the market. I kept thinking of how gems mean lore, knowledge, magical energies, and so forth within many cultures, which is actually very accurate. That's when it popped into my head that we could do something strange and visually evocative for the transports. Ajit's wife was a narrative consultant on the project, helped him shape how the Concord jewels would interact with the Radiant Citadel and the 15 civilizations they were connected to. If you thought Journey from the Radiant Citadel was had delivered all the gemstones it could muster within its structures and transit system, you've underestimated the riches within its pages. The Preserve of the Ancestors, a domed wilderness cut into the heart of the Auroral Diamond, is home to spirits from countless lands. These spirits inhabit tiny jewels and sometimes gather together with others of their kind from similar origins, fusing to become larger beings known as incarnates. They seem like some sort of gem elemental type creature, or probably have a stat block for it. These animal and plant-based beings can carry with them wisdom of whole civilizations. A lot of Western fantasy rotates around the written word. As much as I love books, many cultures have the practice of oral storytelling. In India, religious texts were passed on generationally using this method. Leaders of communities would memorize material until it eventually got written down. The Preserve of the Ancestors is my nod to oral storytelling, and the art team knocked the vision of the incarnates right out of the park. Also, I love this kobold. I love kobolds in general. It's got a crab in a cage. I also like crabs. It's a blue crab. I think this is awesome. 100%, 10 out of 10. Would art again. A New Hope. Journey through the Radiant Citadel is also a product of its time. It's not usual for people these days to feel tense and under siege in their lives. I wanted to give them a fantasy space that felt protected and safe. We kind of know where we are with that, right? The world is a scary place at the moment, especially now. Sure, they can go on any of hundreds of adventures that will be spawned out of this place and bad things might happen, but they can always return to the Radiant Citadel and find shelter, food, healing, and the respite they need to regroup and rebuild before heading out on a new adventure. That is also something that we don't typically have in a D&D campaign. You might have a home base, but it's usually potentially under siege. It definitely reminds me of, again, it's a hub. It reminds me of hub worlds in video games, right? They're usually like, once you can get back to the hub world, you're usually safe because, you know, there's protection or enchantments or whatever the case may be. Even though there are some dark places in this book, we wrote it with a silver lining, and that is of hope. We heard about this in the Twitter thread. We wanted to show that the collaboration between civilizations allows them to tackle complex ideas and come to a better understanding. Nowhere is that hope more evident than in the book's disclaimer. There is no guarantee that the light of the Radiant Citadel will be visible to the naked eye on your plane of existence, but know that it is there, whether seen or not, which is also a look into the disclaimer, and that's also a very moving message. That was the last thing I wrote for Journeys through the Radiant Citadel. It reveals it means a lot to me to write that disclaimer, and I became very emotional. I kind of feel a little emotional just reading it myself. I wanted to say that hope is still with us, whether you can see it or not, whether you know it or not. Hope is still here. It launches on June 21st, 2021, or 2022, rather. So coming up in a little over 2 months from now. And again, pre-orders and things are available at the moment. And again, the collector's edition cover will be available in local game stores. So, well, this ended up being a little bit longer than I wanted. And yes, some of you will be like, "Oh, you just read through it." Yeah, well, how else am I going to get it out there? I could, I did try to inject my thoughts as we went through this. But like I said, reading through all of this and just seeing the sheer passion behind the co-lead of this. And then also, you know, a lot of people might have issue, some people seem to have issue with the direction that Wizards of the Coast as a whole is taking in different areas. And I think that this also makes everyone, wow, that was a horrible statement. People have issues with Wizards of the Coast and the way they sort of handle things. So I think this should, possibly more than other adventure books, be a reason that you should definitely check this out, because the co-lead, the mastermind behind all of this, is someone who doesn't work for Wizards of the Coast, is completely freelance. Yes, there may be NDAs and things he can't say because, you know, he's working on this project for Wizards of the Coast. He's not in WotC's pocket, as it were. WotC doesn't give him his paycheck, right? So because of that, he can feel free to write things and say things and has this sort of outside perspective to craft this whole adventure and this whole world. And I think all of that combined, I mean, again, I love the Forgotten Realms, and I specifically have a love for Candlekeep. I don't know why, I just always have. And Candlekeep Mysteries was, in my opinion, kind of a big letdown to me. There's definitely some issues that I had with it, including, like, I mean, one of the major things that, for me, just like on a purely logistical thing in a book about a library, was you didn't have appendices, you didn't have, like, where you couldn't have gathered all the magic items and the monster stat blocks in an appendices, in a very interesting way to categorize things in a book about a library, which kind of, I feel like, was the biggest misstep on that book. But I also, like I said, I felt like the adventures were very disjointed. I didn't feel, I mean, obviously I know they were all standalone, but I don't know, I didn't really feel like there was any kind of connection. I guess that's part of the thought process behind it. But I'm more excited for this book, having read all of this stuff, knowing that they had essentially 2 years to work on this book, basically almost a full year from when the writers were onboarded to when kind of final drafts were starting to be developed. The fact that people were working together, riffing off of one another, getting a chance to see everybody's influence. The fact that, again, I feel like it would be very simple in a lot of situations for someone like Ajit to just write the Radiant Citadel first, because it was his piece, he came up with the whole concept, just write it, and here it is. But instead, he took time to wait for everybody else to finish their works, look at all of their stuff to make sure that whatever they wrote for the specific culture or area was present and injected into the main hub world while you'll be spending most of your time. Clearly, this is a very passionate writer, a very passionate person who has a love for gaming, and I think it even comes through very well when you see if you watch the interview on the D&D channel. So I definitely have, I was pretty down on Radiant Citadel, honestly, when it came out, because I'm kind of turned off to anthology adventures in general. And that's no fault of the Radiant Citadel. That's just really what we've seen so far. They haven't really been my cup of tea. I haven't really liked, you know, Tales from the Yawning Portal, I feel like, is oft forgotten. And Candlekeep Mysteries kind of was a lackluster response, especially when you saw a lot of the stuff about the writers talking about how all of their stuff was changed and they had to cut a bunch of stuff, and the seemingly rushed nature of that book. but Radiant Citadel seems like the time and care and effort was taken to make this something truly worth your time. And again, this is going to be a bunch of different voices injecting a bunch of different concepts and cultures and things that I'm not familiar with, that I'll get to experience and see, and things that I probably never would have thought up myself that I'll get to see come forward in this book. And I'm pretty excited to give it a shot and see. Again, I'll still do my full coverage when the book comes out, you know, in June. We'll check out what's new in it. We'll kind of give our general thoughts. We'll do a live stream, all that kind of stuff that we normally do. But, you know, I was going into it with a pretty just meh concept of it. Now I'm actually a little bit more excited about it. But again, I'll still reserve my final judgment for when we actually have it in hand. Hopefully, this new sort of mentality I have about it, this new feeling, serves me well in that the book lives up to those expectations. But that's enough out of me. I've been talking for about a half an hour here. So let me know your thoughts. Having heard all of this stuff, seeing all this, again, I'll have links to all of the Twitter threads as well as the Dragon Plus article in the comments down below if you want to check them out for yourself. You need to dive through comments and other feedback, and there's probably more information you could find if you go digging. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you all next time.